So.
No one make, like, comments.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll keep it
All
to
right,
them.
so here's what's going on. So I listened to, so Lloyd Gerson. Has anyone heard of Lloyd Gerson? So he's actually at Toronto right now, and he's a Platonist scholar. But he has a trilogy of books called Plato and Platonism, Aristotle and Other Platonists, and Platonism and the Possibility of Philosophy. And I have not gone through them yet, but I want to do that over Christmas break. But the basic idea is that he basically has a view of modernity, which I think is a proper way to view modernity, where he schematizes it into two big categories. So he calls one Platonism, like the prefix "ur," or Big Tent Platonism, and he calls the other category, essentially naturalism. Okay, and so the way I would describe it for simplicity's sake is you have secular modernity and you have Platonism, and these are the two giant traditions. So let's define these, and you can cash these out in 5 to 7 attributes each. So, and I can send this picture in the group me after. So secular modernity really has 5 essential features to it. One is going to be materialism, which is defined as bodies and their properties are the only things that exist. Okay? It also is cashed out in terms of mechanism. So this is most famous in the philosophy of nature right now. So in biology, physics, and chemistry classes, people are seen in the mechanistic philosophy. And we can define that as basically efficient and material causation being the only types of causation. That's a Thomistic term, or an Aristotelian Thomistic phrase, but you'll learn more about that later. The third thing that characterizes secular modernity would be nominalism, which is the denial of forms and only the agreement that only particular things exist. So like this pen, this marker, and that marker right there, we can say, Plato would say that they share in the form of markerness. Nominalists would say no. They would also deny essences.
Because it's just based on names.
Based upon particular, yeah, exactly.
Things that happen to look like that marker.
Yes, yeah.
Necessarily such a thing as a marker.
Yes. And then the fourth thing would be relativism, which is that truth is basically just an appearance. There is no truth. You can specify global, local, ethical, cultural. Like you can specify types of relativism, but that's the fourth characteristic. And then the fifth would be skepticism. So we can't come to knowledge of universal truths, and we can't really come to knowledge of anything. So for instance, I talked with a student, and she told me that we simply can't come to knowledge of God's existence. And I said, well, that's a big fucking claim, to be honest. And Thomas would dispute that, but more so, that is a claim which you have to back up. It's just a skeptical assumption that's latent in modernity. You get this all the time. So these things, these assumptions or these positions are often espoused by your fellow peers, but they're very, very rarely argued for. But they do, if you talk to people, you can really push them and uncover these fairly quickly. So all 5 of those, I think, combine into naturalism, essentially. Naturalism famously is tricky to define, but if we define it by basically as an emergent worldview coming from those 5, I think that's fairly accurate. And that, I think, is really what characterizes secular modernity. And when you get into the specifics, you'll have things like McIntyre's emotivism falling under relativism or skepticism. You'll have Fazer's position in the abortion and euthanasia debates falling under an anti-nominalist position he espouses. And you can go on and on and on. You'll have people like Robert Kuhn's, who advocate for an anti-materialist view of and an anti-mechanist view of the philosophy of nature. So that is really what secular modernity, I think, is going to be. I think you can cash it out in those terms. Now, why is this important? Because atheism and this secular modernity go hand in hand. You can kind of draw the biconditional arrow there. And that means that atheism is not just the proposition that God doesn't exist. It is, in fact, a complex web of these philosophical positions. Ergo, in order to refute atheism, you have to refute these 5. And in order to convince somebody of theism, you have to also, as it follows from that, you have to kind of refute these 5. What significance does this have to your lives? It's a way to view the world, and it going back to my discussion previously about the culture around here, I think that this is helpful to keep in mind because your romantic and personal relationships especially can really be analyzed in this fashion. And so if you are friends with somebody who's an atheist or you're dating somebody who's an atheist, you should probably be wary that their entire worldview is going to be laden with these assumptions, which are contrary to yours. That can cause problems. This also helps with viewing politics. It helps with viewing a lot of stuff. So I think that this is important, and it can help you in your political debates because you can start to see that there's a lot more at stake than just the trite screaming matches between right and left over, say, abortion. You are essentially, in those screaming matches, you're entering into a philosophical graveyard where people are surrounded by philosophers who are dead, quote, but they need to be, and by that I simply mean that they're surrounded by philosophical assumptions that they are not yet conscious of, and you kind of need to resurrect those and bring them to the forefront for them to understand what's going on. And
you don't even understand what you're arguing for.
Exactly.
It kind of seems like what you're saying, like you're saying with like atheism versus like Christianity would be a fantastic proxy variable for kind of like somebody's worldview.
Yeah, it is.
You expose their ideologies.
Yeah.
You make them see, oh, I don't actually believe this because I have good reasons for it. I believe this because the media, the public opinion,
Yeah. Then this is one reason why I think actually philosophy of religion is one of the best things to study, because you are necessarily getting into all these other debates, and through philosophy of religion you're going to get into metaphysics, which is going to push you into the political sphere, and you're going to see connections. But that's the first part. So let's move on now to the Platonic tradition, or what Gerson calls the Ur-Platonism. So this is a lot more dense, and I'll just list these. But what he cashes this out in seven basic or seven positions. So he says first, the Platonic tradition. So for instance, Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, Boethius, obviously Thomas, Edith Stein, von Hildebrand, MacIntyre, and Fraser. These people are, and possibly even Jordan Peterson, that's up for debate. But all these people are, while they may not be Catholic Thomists, they are all going to be Ur-Platonists or Big Tent Platonists. As Plato says, they'll be friends. They're friends of the forms. That's his terminology for it. And so Gerson, he says this. He says all of these people in the Platonic tradition, they buy into seven main points. First, the universe has this systematic unity to it. So the universe is ordered and knowledgeable. Two, this unity reflects a top-down explanatory hierarchy, which is opposed to modern naturalism, which goes from the bottom up, starting with physics and atoms. We start with the divine as a first principle of irreducible explanatory complexity and move down from there in our analysis. And that's the third. The divine constitutes this irreducible explanatory category. So Plotinus is going to be the best example of this, where he posits the one as a fundamental principle that has to precede the complex. So for Plotinus, the simple has to precede or come before the complex. Fraser articulates this with his Neoplatonic proof, where he tries to argue that the existence of a chair presupposes the existence of the one, and that one is the God of classical theism. So you can get into that at some point on your own. So the fourth category is going to be that the psychological constitutes this other irreducible explanatory hierarchy. And this is going to be found really in the natural sciences, with arguments for the immateriality of the mind. The Platonic tradition argues that the mind is an irreducible explanatory category. You cannot reduce the mind to the brain. And they're going to do this using arguments that involve the intentionality, which is a technical term in the philosophy of mind, arguments about anti-nominalism. So this is Thomas's argument for dualism. In the Summa, he's going to argue that since we can grasp abstract forms, the mind can't be material. Obviously, it's more complex than that, but you get the point.
For intentionality, isn't that kind of a modern teaching type argument, though, since Aristotelianism presupposes intentionality in material things as well?
I'm TAing for cognitive science next semester, so I'll get back to you on that. That's like my plan over Christmas break, is to go over arguments for like immateriality of the mind and stuff, because I'm too fuzzy on them.
Like Phaser always talks about is that like the argument from intentionality is kind of a more Cartesian, less uses the argument from rationality. It comes from, I mean, it's sort of implicit in Thomas, but it comes from I think the philosopher's name was like John Ross, which is kind of
James Ross, right?
Ross,
Yep.
Yeah, like the mind can like
go ahead.
Like rational, definite natures to like what the mind can grasp.
Yeah.
Can be present in material things.
Have you read James Ross's paper Aristotle's Revenge?
No, I've just I've just read Phaser's sense of James Ross.
Okay.
In the Scholastic Essays, I think.
Okay.
It was.
I got to go back and take a look at it again. I read it over the summer. So then the fifth thing is that, and this gets more into people. So people have a role in this metaphysical hierarchy of being, and their happiness consists in finding their place in it. And for instance, like our happiness, Norris Clark articulates this in his book, The One and the Many. He says that really our happiness consists in the study of our first cause, i.e. God, and the realization that he's also our final end. And everything in between is kind of a commentary on that. And that contemplation of the divine, this is a very Platonic idea as well, contemplation of the divine and union with the divine, or participation, I should say, is going to be what is our ultimate fulfillment. So Clark gives a famous argument where he talks about grasping of finite particulars. So you get your job, you graduate college, you buy your house, but you're always longing for something more. And eventually you get to the point, and this is an Aristotelian argument in the Nicomachean Ethics as well, in the first where he talks about happiness or eudaimonia. But Clark kind of takes this in the Thomistic tradition and says that you're always grasping for a good. You're always grasping for good, the true, and the beautiful, and it's always slipping away, and that it can only be satisfied by an infinite true, good, and beautiful, which is God for Thomas. So that's going to be that fifth thing that this Platonic tradition buys into. The sixth thing is that moral and aesthetic values are to be analyzed by reference to this hierarchy. So that's kind of the ethical and the aesthetic account. I won't really go into that. But, I mean, obviously when we talk about moral theory, I would think that this tradition is going to say that metaphysics underlies your moral theory. And so you have to derive your ethics from a sound metaphysics, which is what the natural law tradition in Catholicism would in fact do. And then 7, the epistemological order is contained within this metaphysical order. I'm not too familiar with this claim, so I'll leave it to you to figure that out, and I'll get back to you when I take a look at Gerson's work. And I gave you examples of people who I thought were kind of these friends of the forms. So again, Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, Boethius, Karl Wojtyla, Pope John Paul II, etc. So with that in mind, I'm going to say 2 more things. I'm going to say that we can think about, okay, well, how do people come to this Platonic tradition? And I think that there are at least 2 ways we can articulate. And I think that they're really encapsulated by MacIntyre and Phaser. And I actually think that MacIntyre and Phaser are 2 sides of the same coin. I think their entire project is really the same, but in different areas of philosophy. So MacIntyre's big goal is to point out the incoherence of modernity, specifically modern ethics, and the modern approach to rationality within the universities. So again, he's going to do this in After Virtue with regard to ethics, and then he's going to do this in Whose Justice, Which Rationality, in regard, and 3 rival versions of moral inquiry, in regard to our rational faculties and the modern university. And so what you can do, and this is taken from 3 rival versions really, is you can provide an analysis of contemporary ethics, After Virtue, and the universities, and you can argue that they're in utter decay and incoherence, which I think MacIntyre's argument for this works.
It's a poison well of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a poison well, like
yeah.
Like the very thing that's supposed to quench our thirst is poison.
Mm-hmm. That's going to be McIntyre's. He's basically going to say that, but in just hundreds and hundreds of pages.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So he's going to say that there are really three types of rationality. There's the Augustinian and Thomistic account, the Enlightenment account, and the genealogical account. The Augustinian and Thomistic account is going to be based upon us reading a corpus of texts and entrusting yourself to a teacher who guides you through that corpus of texts. And rationality itself is developmental, and it presupposes that schema of a corpus of texts and a teacher. And you develop rationally under the guidance of the texts and that mentor, okay? The Enlightenment rationality is what we've all been brought up in, and it's the scientistic paradigm of, okay, let's come in, and it's really famously started by Descartes, I think, and the early moderns, who say we want to kind of extrapolate out our biases, extrapolate everything out, and come to this observer-neutral position. This observer-neutral position where we can read a text with no presuppositions. Scientism, which is the idea that you can only come to knowledge through scientific processes, is going to be a subspecies, I think, of this. And that can be. I think it falls within that category.
Some would say it starts from Machiavelli.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third approach is the Nietzschean and Freudian view, which is the genealogical approach. This is famously articulated in Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals, Freud's Future of an Illusion, and it's basically a way of approaching the world where you're trying to unmask ideology. Foucault would be somebody who McIntyre brings up as well. And so the goal here is to view, yes, it's to view, I think Peterson needs to read McIntyre. He really does, because he's almost grasping at this, but he's not going far enough. But the idea is that rationality itself is seen as a means of political ideology. And so in evaluating rationality and rational arguments and stuff, the Freudian or the Nietzschean is going to say we need to unmask the underlying ideology behind the person. So an instance of this is going to be Nietzsche's critique of Christianity, where he attempts to unmask the early Christians' motives for being martyred and for continuing Christianity. And that's going to be ressentiment and this whole psychological schema. So those are the three kind of types of rationality that embed or that are latent in modernity. And McIntyre argues that the Enlightenment one and the genealogical one fail, so therefore we're left only with the Augustinian and Thomistic. And that itself, that argument itself, if successful, is a way straight into the Thomistic tradition, because you now have to buy into the notion that we have a corpus of texts from the church fathers all the way up till now with people like Phaser, and we have teachers, namely people like at the Thomistic Institute and peers, who are going to kind of guide you along that route. So that's one way, and that way you can sum that up in saying, like, the discontent with modern ethics in the university could be a way into this tradition. The second way is a bit simpler, and simpler in name only. When you get into it, it's much more complex, but that's going to be Phaser's route. And so I see him as doing the McIntyrean project, but in regard to metaphysics. Because if you read his scholastic metaphysics and his Aristotle's Revenge, he constantly points out one of the main themes is that modern metaphysics is in a state of incoherence. It doesn't recognize where it is. So, for instance, his talk about David Lewis and causality, Phaser's argument, his entire argument is that modern notions of causality, modern Humean notions fail, and the reply to that would be dispositional accounts of causality. That's just final causality cashed out in a modern name.
Hume admits that. I read it today.
Yeah.
He's like, well, maybe it's that there's like he has like some strange counter argument to it, but he's like, well, yeah, like maybe there's like a final cause, but then then why does God like let evil things happen? Like,
yeah, that's just a pathetic
Final causality.
It's basically that things act for an end. So if I take I got into a huge debate with Johnson, Professor Johnson, over this, because it's straw-manned where the early moderns and a lot of people now think that final causality refers to things having a conscious end. And so, the straw man claim is, Aristotle thought that rocks would move toward the center of the earth based upon their own rationality or something. It's not that. It's basically that things act for a specific range of ends. So when I light a match, it's not going to burst into ice. It's when I light it, it's going to burst into flames.
Yeah.
When I throw a brick through a window, it's not going to burst into a bouquet of flowers. If you're familiar with that example, the stock example. I think it stems from Hume. Or like when I hit a billiard ball, it's not going to turn into a golf ball. Yeah. Or like Phaser's example, I think, is my own example is a golf ball. If I throw a golf ball against the concrete, it's not going to bounce to the moon. Phaser's example is if I throw a rubber ball, it's not going to become conscious and start following you.
And so Hume basically says there's no reason for us to, without a doubt, believe that when I put a billiard ball against another one, that the second one's going to move.
Yeah. This is the negation of that view. This is the common sense view.
Right, because Hume basically says the laws of nature could change tomorrow. Like the only reason we have real knowledge is because of continued examples of it in our real life.
But it's just a pattern and can change at any point, as
right.
opposed to
so
laws of existence.
He's saying that the way that we interact with the world. Yeah, he's like the way that we interact with the world is literally just we operate based on these patterns that we've noticed, that we've drawn from, but really actually every iteration of our different different actions are not actually very different iterations from the first one, and so we think that there's some sort of special character about it, but it's really not. There's no connection between them. There's a conjunction because they happen one after the other, but causality, it just doesn't exist. He's because we can't identify the power that links them up.
Yeah,
that doesn't make any sense.
That's literally what I'm fucking reading about.
That's the Humean view.
Nothing
Yeah.
causes anything.
Well, there are various interpretations of Hume in the contemporary literature, but one is an anti-realist view where Hume, it's claimed, doesn't believe causation exists at all.
Yeah.
Others would read Hume as saying that causation exists, but it's just the constant conjunction of two events, and
causations that could change.
It's like correlations, and we project the concept of causation onto that.
It's that we feel a cause, and so that's the cause. That's all cause is that we feel it.
Yeah.
There is a Christian acceptance of that, and it's basically the concept of God continuously wills that things happen in consistent ways, but there is no necessary meaning within things occurring that means that they should continue to occur.
That's called occasionalism.
Yeah, it's basically God just continues to will that every time that a billiard ball hits another billiard ball, it continues to move.
That makes
and that makes
sense.
sense.
It follows from a Humean account. So this is exactly what I was talking about.
It's a Christian way of accepting a Humean rejection.
Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about when metaphysics. So you accept a metaphysical assumption about causality, then your religion, you have to adopt a religious framework around that. So metaphysics really is underlying a lot of your assumptions here. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you and you can talk about I'm sure this relates to I forget how, but I'm sure this relates somehow to divine command theory, or maybe I should clarify that and say essentialism and nominalism relate to divine command theory. We might get into that later.
This is so interesting to me because I've thought through. I've thought through my beliefs a lot, but I've never heard of any of these very well formed arguments named, especially just being presented with a big platter of dishes.
Yeah,
I don't know what to take.
Yeah.
And then each one sounds better or worse than the last.
Yeah.
Sorry,
well, this
There is a level of we are proposing them in ways that are based on our already having read them in our.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I say, I'm this.
I have not read nearly as many as y'all have because I've been a philosophy major for 3 weeks.
Yeah, there you go. So
he's our age.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say
he skipped a year because
he's a genius.
I worked, man.
There we go. So what Phaser's doing is he's kind of pointing out some incoherences in modern metaphysics, and he's saying, look, this stuff doesn't add up. He's a big critic of trying to reduce the rational. For the Aristotelian, there's the rational level, humans, rational animals. Then there's the animal level, And there's the organic, and then you can say the inorganic. And so Fazer's a big critic of trying to reduce those like modern science does, because modern science tries to reduce everything down to the inorganic. That would be what we call...
It came from rocks.
Yes. Well, this is famously espoused within the Darwinian paradigm of, okay, we came from inorganic matter. For the Aristotelian, that's logically impossible.
Is it irreducibly complex to say that like a human being cannot come from a rock? Like, it is impossible.
For the Aristotelian metaphysics, that's impossible.
Why?
Maybe we'll have to have a whole
Yeah,
session
sorry,
on
I don't
that.
know.
Yeah. We'll have to have a whole session on that.
There's
Oh my
a lot.
gosh.
Yeah.
Aristotle, like, you
Fuck.
can accept stuff like this
Yeah.
if you're not accepting the permanence of forms, right? And accept evolution, but you can't accept a non-deistic evolution.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have a higher form imposing something new on those rocks.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? You can't bring
Because
something
forms can't
It's
come
not
from
like
something.
randomly
Yeah.
comes together.
Well, Hume says that chance doesn't exist in nature, so...
Yeah. Well, beyond
That's
the
interesting.
I
first
wouldn't
level
believe.
of
I don't believe in chance. So
Mhm.
I don't believe in luck.
Because
Well, for-
there's this implication of hierarchy. You can't take steps up the hierarchy
Exactly.
without something else above you pulling you up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So again, the rational faculties are irreducible to the animal, which is irreducible to the organic, which is irreducible to the
yes,
inorganic.
Yes, it's like levels that cannot
Yeah.
be fallen.
Yeah. So that would, but once you start to the point I'm making is that once you start to recognize these things in modern metaphysics, you'll be drawn toward the Platonic tradition. And so that's another way into this Ur-Platonism, essentially. That's how I came in, because I came in originally through philosophy of mind, because I was pissed off that we were only taught Descartes and we weren't taught Malebranche, Augustine, or even Thomas. And when I found out that they had very strong theories of philosophy of mind, I was like, what's going on here? And then I started to get into talks about intentionality. Then I was like, well, it seems like you can't reduce down these levels. And then I found Fazer's work. That's the route that I went.
Seems like Phaser is a pretty smart guy.
Yeah, I mean, when I went through this phase of crippling depression over my uncle's death, and like I had this horrible breakup at the same exact time, like I read Fazer's work, and I was like, yeah, no, exactly. I sent him an email thanking him over the summer. He responded.
What does he say?
He sent me a big paragraph.
It's amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, like,
Did he appreciate it?
yeah.
Was he-
Yeah. I mean, philosophy. Like, we oftentimes it's I've heard the term thrown around, like it's just a mental masturbation. You hear that all the
I have
time.
heard that.
What?
Yeah, and about philosophy, have you not heard that yet?
No.
Oh, I hear it all the time. Yeah. Yeah. But my point is, like, philosophy is not a trivial matter. Like, that's not how it should be characterized. It really is, like, about spiritual matters that often account in
That's why I'm
life
here.
and death.
The only
Yeah.
reason, because
finance
people don't
economics.
actually fucking understand philosophy.
Yeah.
Because education used to be based on philosophy, and I literally.
Yeah.
Well, Kepler, how are you going to make money with that degree?
Dude, that's always
Yes,
the
yes,
question.
exactly.
If only
Yeah.
it was about that. If only it was
If
about
only.
making money.
Dude,
Yeah.
The problem is, though, in
I'm beyond
studying
your
philosophy,
money.
I just like have rethought everything that I've ever learned, but more importantly, the way that I learned it.
Yeah.
The way that
Yeah.
we learn
Yep.
things is
Yep.
so
It's
fucking
so bad.
inefficient.
It's so bad. Yeah,
It
it's
doesn't
so
make,
bad.
It doesn't make a
Yeah.
lick of sense. It's just because we're 5-10 generations removed from
Yeah.
thinking people.
Yeah.
It's absolutely.
I met this girl
So
that was
mad.
mad.
It
She,
is so
she,
mad.
she told me
It
she
is
told me
unbelievably frustrating.
philosophy is useless. She
Mhm.
told me that.
Dude, I get
You
that.
look at her in the face and go,
Yeah.
"No, you're."
And I tried to explain it to her, and I was
look her in
even,
the face and you go, yeah, that's what we learned the
and
other
I was
day.
Yeah.
forming like philosophical arguments.
I was okay when he said that. I was like, "Come on, like you're not like he means it in some other sense."
Oh, he means it. He is the most
Halper
dry
said.
sense of humor.
Halper constantly
Halper
says
said
philosophy
it
is
and played it the
useless.
other day.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Look,
yeah.
Everyone around you is going to tell you this is useless. There is no point to this. Like he's saying consistently. In secular
From the
society,
Enlightenment.
Focus, then there is no.
Yeah, from
everything
yeah.
being in political class is the most pointless thing you could ever do.
From the modern Enlightenment account of rationality, it certainly is.
It is. There's
Yeah.
no point to it. There's
Yeah,
no use to
but I
it.
mean,
There's nothing
but
to
so
do.
I had a student whom we will not name, and Nick knows who it is, who came to my office and she shit on the discipline of philosophy for 30 minutes, and there's nothing you can do to those people. But her point was that this is stupid. I don't get any practical applicability to my life from this. I can't read the text because I don't understand the words he's using. I'm like, Hegel, preface to the phenomenology, tarrying with the negative. You want to talk about it? Nope, storms out of my office. I'm like, that is the wrong attitude, and that's the modern university is what's inculcating that. Modernity is inculcating that attitude in you. Yeah. Yes, I've heard that line.
Right,
I've heard that
exactly.
line.
There's, I was like raised. It's not my parents' fault because it's the exact same thing. But just in school in general, you're raised to find the right answer, not to think.
Yes.
And like
Yes.
I was so lucky that I was able to go to a private school where it's not nearly as bad as it is in especially the other schools in Atlanta, inside the Atlanta area. Yeah. But like the like inability for like or the like excuse me, the lack of emphasis on how to think and teaching children that are like 5 and 6, like this is what the world is about. Yeah. Is about finding things out for yourself and not like let's memorize the days of the fucking week. Because you'll pick up that factual information along the way if you're taught how to process the world. But we're just not.
I also know the days of the week, like in that same.
So this is like you're starting to see that this group is kind of like almost an anti-modernist group. In a sense.
Yeah, so I'm gonna.
You're gonna leave? Okay.
Great, yeah.
Have fun.
I'm not at 2-hour park, except I don't want to get to.
Cool.
I'll
Have
see
fun.
you later.
Yes.
Anti-fraternity acts.
This is the anti-frat.
We're like after modernity.
Yes.
Like
we're after virtue.
Wait. After parking in North Deck, not free.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. Yeah.
Anti-fraternity access.
Yes. Yes. So let me give an argument here. Let me give an actual argument here, because this is interesting. So I do have an anti-modernity argument. So remember we cashed out secular modernity with those 5 characteristics, wherever they're up there, if not. So we can say this is a basic syllogism. It is irrational to contradict many good intuitions about ourselves without a good reason to do so. The sapientia mundi, which is Paul's term in the Bible, which means the wisdom of the world, which is how I'm going to describe from here on out this secular modernist paradigm. The sapientia mundi does just that. Namely, it contradicts many very good intuitions about ourselves without a good reason to do so. Conclusion, it is irrational to believe in the sapientia mundi, or this modern paradigm. Let me give some examples. I think it's Greek. So let me give some examples. So for instance, faith, love, good and evil, all these things are reduced to nothing in this sapientia mundi. With these modern, when you follow out these assumptions we laid out, or these positions, these 5 positions, faith in God is deemed as irrational. This inner dynamism, this inner sense of faith that we have, this inner sense of the divine, it's just seen as an illusion. Love, again, is nothing but neurochemical reaction. Good and evil don't really exist, so you couldn't say under this skepticism and relativism in its strongest terms, you couldn't say that the Holocaust was bad. You couldn't say Hitler was evil. You can't say that Jesus was good, and that's where you kind of fall into this emotivism we talked about. Human dignity is extremely hard to justify. So the intrinsic worth of the human person, don't see how you could do that in this with these assumptions. Realism again. So realism about mathematics. You know about that, Alex. Phaser's arguments about mathematics. That you would have to say, you would have to say something like triangles don't really exist. They're just the particulars. There is no triangularity. There's just the particular, which is so contrary to our intuitions.
Well, I mean, it's a function of boundedness.
Yeah, exactly. You'd also have to say that intentionality doesn't exist, because intentionality provides the counter arguments to the to the reducibility of the human mind to the brain, and intentionality is simply the directedness or thinking about something or someone. So Alex Rosenberg famously cashes this out in The Atheist Guide to Reality. He says that when I'm thinking about fire or snow, I couldn't actually be thinking about it. Like, that's just an illusion, because of his commitments to these five positions. Again, beauty would go out the window, because if we reject forms, i.e. nominalism, we can't say that something is beautiful. We can just say, well, it looks beautiful in quotes to me, but there is no beauty itself. And then again, meaning of life kind of goes out the window, I think. And we would have to say that, yes, we can live, we're going to live here for, 50, 60, 70 years, but other than that, that's just it. And again, eventually the universe will end in a heat or cold death. But we have these intuitions that are so contrary to these. We have these intuitions about beauty, truth, goodness, the meaning of life. We have all these intuitions, and it's like the Sapientia Mundi goes against all of these intuitions. And not only that, but if we go into this Platonic tradition, we have good reason to believe that these intuitions are in fact true. So because of that, the argument, I think, is sound. But with that, I think that's all I've got left. But you can think about that. You can dwell on that, and that's really what this group is about at the deepest level. It's about a bunch of people who do not buy into the assumptions of the wisdom of the world, as Paul talks about, and it's impacted my life. That's the only reason I'm here. I would not have gone into a PhD program to study Davidsonian semantics or some shit. Like, I'm here to study this big Platonism and share it with other people because I think it's life-changing. And that's, yes, and that's why I call Thomas this universal solvent to the sludge that we see around us. Again, you can substitute Thomas for Plotinus or Edith Stein or someone, but that's really the point. Yeah, that's really the point of what's going on with this group. So, perfect.